And for the next two sessions, actually, we're going to dive into what the standards in particular that complement the OSHA regulations as far as requirements and best practices in the industry are concerned, how they all mesh together, and what they say about aspects of crane operation. So for the first of these, we're going to turn to Tom Sickelsteel, who is the CEO of the National Commission for the Certification of Crane Operators. Tom is third generation of a family that brought cranes to the Pacific Northwest through his grandfather's company, I think, Sickelsteel Cranes. He's an alternate member of the ASME or ASME B30 main committee, and he's a member of the B30.5 subcommittee on mobile cranes. Before becoming CEO of NCCCO, Tom served on the board of directors of NCCCO for 10 years and held numerous other officer positions in Washington State, where I imagine he is going to talk to us from in this virtual world. He has served as a member of the negotiation committee and the panelist for the Washington State Crane legislation. He's also served as a stakeholder for the Washington State Crane Administrative Code Committee and the Select Committee, and he was selected by the Department of Labor and Industries as a subject matter expert for the Washington State Crane Certifier exam, and served in a similar capacity for the NCCCO Lift Director Certification Examination. So with great pleasure, I turn things over to Tom.
Thank you, Graham. I appreciate it. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today and discuss these items and dive into the ASME side, the industry standards. So I just briefly wanted to go through these items. I think they're really important because the industry standards get updated very frequently, and so it's important to understand how they interplay. One of the main reasons that it's important is because the industry standards for cranes are absolutely unique in having roles and responsibilities defined in them. And so in many contracts out there, there's this phrase about adopting industry standards. And when you do so, you bring in ASME, and in the crane world, when you bring in ASME, you also bring in responsibilities. So it's really important to understand that interplay that occurs. Similar to OSHA, ASME answers questions, they respond to inquiry, but they do have a little bit of a faster pace coming out with standards. It's the B30.5 mobile crane standard is on a 3-year cycle. There's ones on a 5-year cycle as well, but 5 years is about as maximum as they go. I would also say that ASME is broader related to the industries it serves. It's not based on activity. It's for all industries and that sort of element. So it's not defined specifically only to construction. It applies to all industries. So I think it's important to dive in here a little bit about what the responsibilities are for each one. I did want to show some of the main crane standards that are out there that we're using in the industry. Each one is a different standard, and so sometimes those involved in a mobile crane may not understand that there's a below the hook hooks and slings standards as well as rigging hardware, personnel lifting. Those are all different standards that comply. So even though you might have one crane doing a certain type of lift, the other elements will come into play on occasion as well. The easiest way to break a lot of the responsibilities down, at least for me, I'm a visual learner, is to walk through a little bit about these roles and responsibilities. And so on the left-hand side, we have the controlling entity, site supervision, crane user, and crane owner. The reason they're on that side is because they don't really require a qualification or a knowledge base. They do require activity, they do have responsibilities, but many times you get in that position through a contract or through a role that you play rather than your qualifications. On the other hand, we have the list of lift director, crane operator, signal person, rigger, assembly, disassembly director, all of those roles do have qualification requirements, competency requirements, those kinds of things. And so there is a different level that's required for each one of those. If I utilize that same screen and we talk about, or the same list, and I've highlighted now lift director and crane user in yellow. And the reason I did that is because they are primarily defined through ASME. OSHA speaks a little bit about lift director. In the compliance manual, it speaks a lot about lift director, but the lift director concept came from ASME a little bit after the OSHA standard was being created. And so truly the main place to find a lot of information about lift director and crane user is through ASME. The assembly disassembly director, on the other hand, comes primarily from OSHA. Under the ASME standard, we look at assembly disassembly director as a lift director. And so the ASME standard does not have language that specifically relates out to assembly disassembly director, whereas OSHA has a defined list. And so we're going to take all of these together, mix them together, and walk through a little bit about what the responsibilities are. So the first thing is who are we dealing with? So site supervisor, crane user, crane owner. What do those people mean? And I would just characterize it this way: that the site supervisor has ultimate control. They set up the game. They set up the rules. They have the manner in which the work is going to be done. In many cases, they're the collection point for data, for collection point for information. If enforcement comes on the site, that's the person they go to open an investigation many times, or to gain access to the site. And so that's really controlling a lot of that information, setting up the rules of the game, that sort of thing. Crane user is an area that has not been really utilized within the contracts in the industries and those kind of thing. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. But they're the ones that arrange the presence on a work site, and they control the use there. That's the key phrase. And so a crane user, I think this almost directly relates to some of the inspection issues that are going on within the industry that Mr. Ketchum outlined. Crane owner, we can know who that is pretty much, but I would just say, just add this point, that if you bear rent a crane under ASME, if you bear rent a crane, you become the crane owner, because the roles and responsibilities are constrained to the work site. This means that Bank of America never becomes a person that we're chasing down for crane owner. However, somebody who bear rents a crane on a site would be the crane owner. If you rent an operated crane, usually the company that owns a crane would be the crane owner. That's how those are kind of defined. So let's walk briefly through the site supervisor responsibilities, just to be clear on what they need to do. And so as we go through these, you'll note that some of these are listed in multiple places, and that's because there's multiple parties, there's multiple roles, multiple responsibilities that need to be coordinated. In some cases, and ASME says this clearly in its standard, one person can serve more than one of these roles. They can these are responsibility areas. These are not defining people. In some cases, they are split out amongst different people. In some cases, one person can do more than one role. So I would just kind of point out a couple of things on the site supervisor in the interest of time. The third bullet point, ensuring a qualified person is designated as the lift director. Under ASME, that is the site supervisor's responsibility. It's a direct tie from the planning of the work to the implementation of the work, is directly tied back to the site supervisor. And that's a really important distinction to know. That's the only entity that is responsible for ensuring that the lift director is qualified and designated. I'd also point out that the site supervisor is responsible for the access room, suitable ground traffic control, working with other crafts on the job site, other activities, who's going to get priority, as well as the ensuring assembly disassembly is supervised by a qualified person. And so a lot of people don't think that a site supervisor would be responsible in any way for assembly disassembly. Again, this is the double check mechanism to ensure that it's done by a qualified person. Site supervisor also is responsible to make sure that, you know, again, setting up the rules. If we're going to work near power lines, what are we going to have more restrictive guidelines for us? Are we going to implement the construction standard if we're in the general industry? What kind of special lifting operations? What do we call a critical lift? What parameters is that? And that sort of thing. And at the very bottom, ensuring crane maintenance is performed. So what report is coming through, what documents are coming through needs to come through to the site supervisor. We'll move to the next one, the crane user. And again, this is the one, and I think this is really the gap in the industry between, we kind of all know who the crane owner is, and we know who the site supervisor is, and then we kind of don't really address who is the crane user. And I think that if we address this as the industry, we would be a safer industry. The crane user is the one that kind of, well, the one that arranges for the crane activities, make sure that supervisors are qualified, ensures that the crane is in proper operating condition. So this means that where's the documentation, have the inspections been completed, all of those kinds of things. This is a central part to understanding that the crane is ready to go, that the crane has the necessary lifting capacity, that the operators meet the requirements. On the next page, there is also, you know, what happens if the operator at the end of the shift inspection says, hey, there's an adjustment or repair that needs to be done. The crane user is the one that helps communicate that to the next operator, especially like in a multiple shift scenario. And you can see here, designating personnel for maintenance, repair, transport, assembly, and disassembly. So they're involved in the assembly, disassembly. And again, it's because they're controlling the use of the crane. Ensuring all inspection, testing, and maintenance programs specified are followed. So all of the inspection side, the testing, how are we going to do that, needs to come through the crane user. And informing crane owner if the rope on the crane is replaced or shortened is an important element as well. So again, this crane user role, I think in the industry, if we focused on it, that would be really important to delegate as part of our contracts, as part of our processes on the front end. The crane owner provides basically the information. They provide the crane that meets the standard set by who? The crane user. And so the crane user's role in that is really important, but the crane owner provides a crane that meets those requirements. They help provide information about components, technical information, and that sort of stuff. And they are also involved in the assembly disassembly element. So you have site supervisor, crane user, and crane owner all involved in assembly disassembly processes. This is important because each one has a different scope. Each one has a different part of the assembly disassembly process. Again, if you bear rent a crane, it's really important to know who are you going to go to for your technical information, because you will have to provide it at times. Who are you going to go to for the other information? It may not be the dealer. It may need to be the engineer of the manufacturer. It may need to be the safety department of the manufacturer that you go to for information instead of maybe the dealer. Crane owner responsibilities also have the establishing the inspection and testing and maintenance program, and designating personnel for maintenance, repair, transport, and disassembly. So you see these interplaying amongst these different roles, and then maintaining the rope information. So that covers the three roles that don't really have any qualification requirements. Let's move into the other side of the coin. So lift director. Lift director has to be a qualified individual under ASME. There's been a change from 2015 standard to 2018. In 2018, the lift director is required to be present at the job site. In 2015, there was a role about, there was a line in the standard about that they had to look at each load, that sort of thing, or make sure that the load was level and balanced. That role has now been moved to a rigger responsibility, and so the lift director does not have that anymore listed within its roles and responsibilities. However, they do have, they're the ones to implement the plan, and they also are the ones to make sure that everyone understands their responsibilities and duties. And this bottom one, they address the safety concerns, and they are responsible if they overrule the concerns. and direct operations to continue. Many times I'm asked if the question isn't the crane operator the lift director? And the answer is typically no. Normally the person at the end of the hook or around the load or with the rigging crew and signal person are the lift director. And it's due to this sentence. They can override the concerns and direct operations to continue. Many times, the only situation where that's probably not the case is in a remote control situation where the operator is fully responsible for all elements of the lift. Lift director responsibilities also appoint the signal person, ensure they qualified, and then they implement the plan that was set by site supervision about how are they going to implement work, and that relates power lines, personnel, special lifting operations, or those sort of things. So let's move on to the crane operator. Mr. Preston did a wonderful job explaining the qualifications that are required for a crane operator under OSHA. Under ASME, the requirement is that they're a qualified individual, so it's not as strict in ASME, but I think OSHA's done a phenomenal job with the responsiveness to the evaluation as well as the certification element and how that interplays. So crane operator responsibilities, I'll just bluntly say it this way. In the old days, they kind of thought crane operators were the captain of the ship. The crane operators, in the way ASME's broken everything down, is truly responsible from the hook to the wheels, or in a tower crane hook to the foundation. And that includes inspecting the crane, reporting adjustments, knowing the requirements, reviewing things with the lift director. They're the ones to be able to calculate net capacity and all other factors that might affect the crane. They're the ones that the lift director can go to get the crane specific information. They also need to know standard hand signals and load rigging information. Signal person, so signal person, ASME says that needs to be a qualified person, and that's going to be revised for 2021, and there's going to be a whole bunch of responsibilities that are listed. It will still be a qualified person under ASME, but the details about how to qualify as an individual will be there under ASME, and the responsibilities will also be added. Under rigger, rigger was added in 2018 as far as responsibilities. It was a targeted area for the qualifications of a rigger. So we'll see if that comes out in 2021. My teammate there, Stephanie Wood, will be able to speak more to that. But ASME did refine the responsibilities and define all of those for a rigger. That was added in 2018. And you can see it's that they understand the rigging equipment, they understand the different, how it's configured and properly placing it, center of gravity, making sure it's protected, and making sure it's balanced, and understanding signals, because when the signal person says, raise a load, they need to understand what that means and how that may impact them. The last one I'll go through is the assembly director. And for this, I'm switching mostly over to OSHA under the construction standard, because I think it's really a good baseline of what needs to happen. So initially, they'll hold an assembly meeting and that sort of thing. And then they can follow the manufacturer employer procedures for assembly. In all cases, they would follow the manufacturer prohibitions, and then there's 12 specific hazards that they would need to mitigate or discuss or address during their meetings. And at the conclusion of that, they would have a post-assembly inspection, and that's a central key element to say the crane has been properly assembled and ready to go for work and that sort of thing. So I would just say on the assembly director, one last thing as far as under OSHA, it's required to be a competent and qualified person. If there are situations where you may have two individuals, one that serves as the competent person, which is the person that kind of addresses the problems and can address the issues, as well as a qualified individual. And the qualified individual might be a technician, an engineer, or those kinds of things. In all those cases, the competent person is the lead of assembly director, and the qualified person is a support to that competent person for performing the activity. And so with that, Mr. Graham, I am completed with my portion.
Thanks, Tom. Much appreciated, and a lot of great insight into an area that's not fully understood generally. We have received a number of questions, as you might expect, but in the interest of time, since we know you're going to be available at the end of the event, we were going to defer those, if you'll, with your permission, to the panel discussion.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Thank you very much.